Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode 104. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard. Thank you so much for joining me this week. As I've been sharing with you, we are celebrating 100 episodes of Hustle and Flow. And many of you recorded messages sharing your favorite episodes. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to share just a snippet each week from listeners who have really benefited from the show. And I personally just want to thank you for all of you that recorded messages. It meant so much to me. So first up for this week is Agatha.
Hi, Heather. My name is Agatha, and I am an associate with a small boutique litigation firm in New York City. I absolutely love your show, and my favorite episode so far has probably been number 55 on setting boundaries. That episode came out at a time when I really needed to set some boundaries in order to focus on what was important at work, and I promptly did so after listening to that episode. So thank you so much for all of your practical advice. Congratulations on 100 episodes, and please keep doing what you're doing.
Agatha, thank you so much for sharing that message with us. And I am so glad that the episode on boundaries was really useful for you. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Okay, so today we are talking about mentorship. Mentorship during the Me Too era, mentorship during what we're calling the Pence effect. This has been showing up so much on social media. It's been showing up in articles, and it's been showing up in my workshops and in my masterminds. So much so that I thought it was worthy of a discussion here on the podcast. The interesting thing to me is this conversation really, it hasn't been at the forefront for over a decade. I mean, like a lot of things with what women professionals deal with, we all have our war stories, but they don't seem that big of a deal. And we simply talk about them really at women's conferences or when women get together. But otherwise, it's just really a badge of honor more than anything. And we don't talk about them with men so much. In many ways, I suspect it is similar to attorneys of color, right? They have all experienced so many different examples of just, little examples of bias and discrimination on a regular basis. But it's not like they're having those conversations with the people that are doing these things. Instead, these conversations happen within our own circles. So oftentimes, I hear stories of people of color, but then I hear other white people who seem to not understand or seem to have not heard of these stories. And so I think that's really what's been happening for the last few decades is those of us that are experiencing something, right? So whether you're a woman, whether you're an attorney of color, whether you're LGBTQ, whatever, your underrepresented group is, we have these stories, we have these conversations, but mostly in our own little circles, our own little bubbles. So we know that it's happening all the time, but it's not being discussed in the larger scope or the larger conversation with the people who are actually creating these issues. And so I think to some degree, that's why a lot of the trainings on implicit bias or the trainings on discrimination aren't really helpful because we have these examples that are given that don't really represent the real issue, and we're not fully having the conversations. So for example, a man might listen to a presentation and say, well, I never do those things, without ever really hearing that the women in the room actually have experienced those things. and sometimes buy them in the room, because that's really awkward, really uncomfortable, and we want to keep our jobs and we want people to still like us and give us good work, right? Same with people of color. They're likely not going to get up in front of the room and share with all of us, white folks, what all we're doing wrong on a regular basis. Because again, there's this fear of, well, if I do or say the wrong thing, it's going to negatively impact me. If someone doesn't hear me, for what I'm really trying to say, for us to have this open dialogue, instead I'm going to be punished, right? And it's interesting because that's now where we are with men who feel like they're now under attack, right? That if they do or say the wrong thing, that they're going to be punished. And so the interesting thing is, this is what most underrepresented attorneys have been dealing with for decades. So, this is not a new phenomenon. It's simply new, perhaps, for white men to have to be in that position of being afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing and it negatively impacting their career just by them being them, right? This is what women, people of color, again, other underrepresented attorneys deal with every day. And so to some extent, I guess that's good that we're all coming to the table from a shared experience. At the same time, it's important that we don't, coddle or, in any way try to make it an easier experience for white men simply because they've not had the experience before, right? So I don't know if that's making sense, but it's a really, really awkward time in that, yes, it's good you're coming to the table. We don't want to be so attacking that it drives people away and creates, a bigger divide, because that really defeats, our end goal, our purpose of really trying to create equality and inclusion in the workplace. At the same time, we don't want to coddle or give a free pass, because that's what we always do. And that's why we are where we are. So there are no really good answers, right? But I wanted to talk about this because it is, like I said, it is showing up. So for me, I did experience this to some degree, but only with one person coming up in my career. And I feel so lucky that I only had this come up with one person. I know in talking with other women that some women have never experienced this until maybe now, although depending on where they are in their career, they're not going to have to experience it. But I do really worry about what this looks like for young females just now coming into law firms and companies. So let's just start with why mentorship is so important, right? And it's not just mentorship, it's sponsorship, but you don't get a sponsor without someone first being a mentor. For me, I never worked for a female, and that wasn't because I was trying to avoid working with women. There just weren't many of them. We know that from all of the statistics. There are very few women partners, and there are even fewer women equity partners. So being on a big case and working for a woman, that was not my reality. I think there was one or two female partners where I did very, discrete small projects, but I never had a matter where I was really working with a woman partner. Every partner I worked with, they were all men. And I am so grateful that those men were willing to mentor me, because that is the biggest issue, in my opinion, with why women don't succeed at the same rate as men in law firms and why women exit out, right? Because they know that they're capable. And it's really disheartening for no one to listen to them or to give them the promotions and the raises and the recognition and the good work that they deserve. There are other reasons too, but I genuinely think that that is the biggest issue. I talked about this in episode 4, Don't Blame It on the Kids, which it doesn't sound as bad as you probably think it is. It's a bit of a play on words. But my point with that, you can go listen to it, was that, we often say that that the reason why women don't succeed in firms is simply because they have kids, and that's why they leave. And it's far more complex than that. And if it was just about the kids, then other underrepresented attorneys would be doing great, right? The men would be doing great, and they're not either. So clearly there's more at play there. And it really is this lack of being included, and being included means being mentored. And so I worked with male attorneys who believed in me, and they gave me good work. And we went to lunch, we went to dinner, we had drinks. They taught me how to be a good lawyer. They taught me how to be a good leader. They taught me the firm politics. You know, had it not been for them, I would not have had access to the information that I needed. And it wasn't just mentorship, it was opportunities. So I don't know how many times, I traveled with men alone because they were the partner and I was the associate, and we had depositions or we had court. Had they not given me those opportunities because they were worried about what something was going to look like, or if they were worried about, I was going to make some unjustified claim, I would not be where I am today. I very much needed all of those opportunities. If I only got them, if there was a woman that could take me, well, there was no woman to take me. Not to mention there were a few women, but they can't possibly be in charge of taking care of all of the women, right? Because we've got a major problem when we look at ratios. The male associates coming up, they're fine because all of the partners are men. But the women associates coming up, they have to have access to more than just a female partner. So when I hear that there are now studies coming out, there was a New York Times article on this, that 50% of men are now concerned about having lunches or dinners or closed door meetings alone with a woman or traveling with a woman, that causes me a great deal of concern as to what this means for women coming up. We absolutely need men to mentor. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I did have this happen in one instance. I did have one male attorney who was concerned about it. And when I'm trying to think of how it first came up, I think I asked the attorney if we could go across the street to have drinks after work. And I don't remember the context of it, but I don't think I was asking it in, any kind of flirtatious way. I don't think there was any chance it was being taken as I was trying to hit on this partner. But he said, I have this rule that I don't meet with women outside of work alone. And I said, what? And this is my personality, right? I'm not really good at being subtle. I was like, what? What are you talking about? And thank goodness he was willing to have this conversation with me. I mean, thank goodness he was willing to just say that as opposed to saying, oh, I've got something to do, because that could happen, right? They just constantly put you off as opposed to being direct and open and honest about what the issue is. So kudos to him for being honest with me so that I could then be like, what are you talking about? And he shared, well, what does it look like, right? So if I'm having drinks with you at the bar, what will people think if they see us? To which I said, they will think that two colleagues are having a drink at the bar talking about work. I said, I know for a fact you go have drinks with male associates. That's why I felt comfortable asking you to go do this. And he said, yeah, but that doesn't look bad. It just looks like, the guys going out for drinks. It opened this beautiful opportunity for us to have this conversation. And I was able to say, yeah, but that actually just demonstrates that if you're willing to go have drinks with the guys and not the girls, that in fact, there is something sexual, right, for a woman and a man to be together. And that just demonstrates how hard it is for women to succeed, because not only do we deal with sexism, right? Overt sexism, we're having to deal with this because this is sexism too. So if anytime you're with a woman and it indicates some kind of inappropriate or sexual relationship, then that means that's how we're seen within the company as well. And he was like, oh, absolutely not. And I'm like, sure, of course. If that's what's being thought of outside, then that has to come into play inside as well. And I said, it's really important that I have the same opportunities that men have. And he said, I always put you on cases. I said, 100% you do. And I am so appreciative of that. But if men get mentoring, and that's what I said, if men get mentoring opportunities, if they get like socializing opportunities with you outside of work, and I don't, they still have a leg up. They still have a leg up. And he said, but we can have those conversations here. We don't have to go to a bar and have a drink. And I said, well, fair enough, but that only works if that's the same way that you interact with the male associates, right? Is we're just doing the socializing within the firm. Because as soon as they get any kind of access or opportunity to you that I don't, we no longer have an equal playing field. And you are harming my career and you're not being a good mentor. And it was really interesting because we were able to have this really open, direct conversation. And what it led to was him saying, well, let me think about it. And I said, I'm going to also think about it. I'm going to brainstorm some solutions that might make you feel more comfortable. So we both did that. And I came up with some solutions of, hey, why don't like two of us go? If it's two women and one man, like, is that better? And he was like, not really. So I was like, okay, well, what if it's one male associate and me? And he was cool with that. And then he too had conversations with other people. When other attorneys would do it, I would show him examples. And it was a dialogue that went on for a while. And there came a time when he was okay with it. And I think we did maybe lunch before we did drinks, but it was so, and at the time I didn't think of it in terms of, isn't it great that we're having this open, honest conversation? But had he not been willing to do that, I would have missed some major mentoring opportunities with him. So, that was very, very early on in my career. And by the time I ended that at the firm, he wasn't just doing that with me. He was doing that with lots of others as well. And so, I give credit to both of us for that. Credit to him for being open and honest, and credit to me for being open and honest. So, that was a long time ago. But apparently this is now super common if these surveys are correct. Some people call it the Pence effect, right? Because Pence came out and said, oh, I don't have dinner with any woman other than my wife. And most of us were like, this is the most absurd thing I have ever heard. But now we've got Me Too, and apparently men that didn't previously feel this way now do feel this way because they're all afraid that, something wrong is going to happen. And I think they now have justification. They have some, leader who is saying that that is acceptable, when I think, this is kind of the whole administrative issue, right? Where we are politically today. For a long time, people didn't think it was appropriate to apparently say things that they were thinking and we didn't even realize, and now they do. So that's where we are. And for women who want equality, for men who want equality, and there are many, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. So how do we approach it? Clearly, I don't have all the answers, but I do have a few ideas. And so I thought I would share them today. Okay, so first, if you are a partner yourself, or if you are in a position in your company or your firm where you feel comfortable having these conversations, right? You've been at this long enough that, it's not really an issue for you about being mentored. It's about making sure that those coming up are getting mentored. If you hear men saying this, and like I said, this has been coming up at a lot of the law firms in the masterminds that I'm doing. So this isn't theoretical. It is happening that men are now saying, I don't feel comfortable doing this. So if you hear that said, I think it's important, depending on the context, maybe don't call them out in front of a lot of people, but don't let that go. Have a conversation with them. And, you're going to know that person. And so you're going to know, is this justified or not? So, because here's the thing, we have men in firms who are bad actors. That's the best way I know how to say it. Because they really do stupid stuff and say stupid stuff, and they get talked to. They get reprimanded. They absolutely never, ever, ever, ever lose their job. I recently heard of a firm actually kicking someone out, which was shocking to me because that is not the norm. Most firms I work with, they all have their stories of the men who constantly, get told to please stop doing that. Settlements are paid, but they get to keep their jobs. And so, of course, they're never learning their lesson. If it's one of those, I mean, obviously, maybe they shouldn't be with women, but for the most part, the men that you're hearing say this, I think it's worth having that conversation of one, explaining why mentorship is so important and how they are going to be negatively impacting careers. And so if they care about equality and inclusion, it's important that they not let their fears get in the way. Two, letting them know that this is truly how we feel and that this is how we have to deal with life every day, is being worried about doing or saying the wrong thing to another group that won't get us in a way that negatively impacts our career. Just let them know that this is what we deal with, so they can do it too. And then three, just letting them know, just don't be stupid. I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I'm cleaning up my language for the podcast, but to me, it's a really simple test. Really simple test. When you're with a woman, right? Whether it is in your office, whether it is having drinks, whether it is having, dinner, being on a case, whatever it is, would you say that whatever you're, going to do or say, would you do or say that with your, by the way, personalities, stuff aside, would you say that to your mother, sister, daughter? Now, again, personalities, some are like, again, depending on their beliefs, upbringing, religion. I mean, I'm thinking kind of like my hometown. I mean, there's a lot of things I wouldn't say in front of any of those people just because they couldn't handle a normal conversation. But like taking that aside, right? Like, so it's like just a generic someone that you respect and love. If you wouldn't do that or say that in front of them, then it's inappropriate. Don't do or say that. Like super, super simple. This is common sense. But there is one step beyond that, which is if you wouldn't say it to your mother, daughter, sister, whatever, not only should you not say it to a woman, you shouldn't say it to a man, right? Like this is how you can start using the filter of if it's not appropriate to say in front of a woman, it's not the good old boy club versus you got to act differently around women. You probably just need to rethink whether or not you're being appropriate to begin with, right? So if there are certain things you're willing to say in front of men and not women, then you are definitely probably part of the problem. You know what I mean? Like this is part of the sexist culture. So that's just a great way to take stock on where you're bringing sexism in. Okay. So again, it's not just a matter of not doing and saying things in front of women. It's a matter of like not doing and saying that stuff, period. Right? Okay. Hopefully we're all on the same page on that. And that's the discussion that needs to be had with those men. And then once they realize that, they're going to be like, oh, well, I'm not an idiot. I'm not stupid. So I've got this. Or they might think maybe I am and I need to take this into consideration. But it's on them, right? It's on them to be appropriate actors. And let's be honest, how often are there completely unfounded claims? Can it happen? Yes. Rarely does it happen. And probably nothing's even going to happen to you if there was an unfounded claim because we have extremely blatant founded claims and nothing happens to those men either other than, being told not to do so. So the fact that you're even worried about it is probably a good sign. Okay. If you are a younger attorney, right? And you don't, like you're in the position where you need the mentoring, right? I would encourage you to think back to the conversation that I just shared early in my career and do the same thing. So if a man is brave enough to even say that, and I think that's probably rare, you can have that same conversation and it just becomes a teaching opportunity and an opportunity where you can come up with a solution together. If they just don't invite you on things, if you just keep getting looked over, consider whether or not you go to them and say, I notice that I never get these opportunities and I don't get to socialize outside of work. I would love to be included. The next time you invite, and you can say names if you see them with them a lot, can you please invite me too? And that's a more subtle way of doing it. And hopefully that can eventually lead to a conversation. The key is always just not to attack, right? Don't make it personal. Just explain the facts. It's much easier for someone to receive it that way if you can, again, not personally attack. Now, again, I'm direct and honest, and sometimes I get animated, but I really do try not to personally attack because that's not going to lead to a solution. And generally, it's not malicious to begin with. So it's really talking through how do we both come up with a solution that works and helps me in my career. Because my guess is they would tell you they want you to succeed. They're just worried about their own success as well. So it's just an educational piece. If you are in management, if you are a diversity professional, if you are a professional development director, if you are in any of those positions, it's incumbent on you, in my opinion, to be getting in front of these issues, right? It might be worth asking some of your associates if they're getting the mentoring that they feel like, and maybe asking a few, has there been any issues with men giving you opportunities or traveling or whatever else? And you can say, there are articles coming out in the New York Times or whatever else. So you're not planting seeds. You're simply saying, this is what's going on. I just want to make sure that that's not happening here, right? Give them a closed door opportunity to tell you whether or not that's happening or if they're hearing about it. And if it is, you can work together with others in management to decide what's the best way to approach this. And, maybe it is a larger presentation. I personally think it's better to do this in smaller groups. People tend to be a little bit more open, and maybe it involves some visits as well to say, let's talk about this. And maybe it involves having some women partners who do feel comfortable having these conversations to get in a room and hash it out per se, right? To just have these frank conversations of here's the impact it's having and this is not going to work. And here's what's appropriate and here's what's not appropriate. And, should we have to say that? Probably not in the perfect world, but let's get in front of it because we don't want the negative consequence of women really being hindered even more in their careers. And if you're part of a women's initiative, most every firm has a women's initiative now, I think it's really worth you too, not just focused on workshops, not just focused on sponsoring things, but being part of starting these conversations and dialogues, and not just in that circle of women. Because this goes back to what I was talking about at the very, very beginning. We already have these conversations in our own circles. So women talking about the Pence effect or mentorship during Me Too movement without involvement from the men, it's not helpful. It's not going to move the ball forward. So I strongly encourage you to brainstorm what are some ways to get in front of this. Also consider, is this happening in your firm? How can we engage in dialogue with men so that we're all on the same page as to what this is going to look like and how important it is that you mentor? Not to mention, and this has come up in a few firms as well, and I have a lot of employment attorneys, there's also going to be you're going to have another backlash because you're going to have like true discrimination lawsuits if your men completely stop having women on cases or traveling with women or anything like that. So, there's that aspect to it. So we have to come to terms with what this looks like and all get together on how to move forward. Again, I personally don't think it's a big firm meeting because it creates way too much tension and people don't feel comfortable having conversations except for those who are always willing to say the craziest things in the, I'm going to say this nicely, the boldest of ways, which shuts down conversation. So I would not recommend doing that. But it may be worth having, again, some smaller conversations and deciding how to get in front of it and recruiting the men to get involved. Because I saw this, I can't remember who said it. I saw it during a clip on the news. They were saying if the men could take their fears that they have towards women and instead redirect it to the men who are actually causing these problems, we would all be much better off, right? So for the men who care, for the men who get it but might still be afraid, they have to be involved in the solution. So recruit them to be a part of this and recruit them to help brainstorm what's the best way to get in front of this, okay? Because they're the ones who actually have the access and the influence over these bad actor men than we do, okay? So we really have to bring them into the fold. And if you are a man listening to this podcast, and we have many men who listen, I guarantee you that you are probably on the good side of this. Consider how you can help facilitate those conversations, and consider how when you hear a man saying something like that, to have that same conversation. Don't just put it on the women to explain to them why mentoring is so important. Have that with them as well, and give them examples of how you do it and, why you're not afraid, right? So that too would be super, super helpful. And regardless of whether you're having these small conversations or larger conversations, tips on do's and don'ts, I do think it's important to really stay focused on, if you are giving any opportunities to men, whether it is an assignment, whether it is something related to a case, whether it is drinks, whether it is golf, whether it is anything else, if you are ever doing anything where you feel comfortable doing it with men, but not with women, know that you are part of the problem, and there has to be a solution. And if you refuse, if you do not want to include a woman, then just know that you need to do both. So if you're going to take a man for drinks and not a woman, then every time you take a man, take a woman too. And if you're not willing to do that, then you don't get to take anyone to drinks. And when you are assigning cases and doing travel, if you're only going to allow a man, then know that you have to add a woman too. Both get to go. And you might think, well, the client's not going to pay for that, or that doesn't work. Okay, then you just lost all of your associates, right? It's just a matter of, are you being inclusive and equal? And that's a great filter to think through on, are you part of why only men are partners, or are you making sure that women have equal opportunities? And, you are indeed being sexist. You are indeed harming women's careers if you are not willing to give them the same access and the same opportunities. And to me, that's just a super, super easy test. I will say it's also probably a great conversation to just talk about mentoring in general. If you're talking about these issues, they're going to start thinking about, am I even helping attorneys? And it's going to help them see maybe even their implicit bias where they're mentoring men and not women. So even having small group dinners or other opportunities to truly mentor and to say, you know what, I want to make sure that anytime I'm including men, I'm also including women, and I'm including underrepresented attorneys. So am I inviting people of color? Am I inviting LGBTQ or anything else like that, right? Am I being as inclusive as possible? So I'll say there was one of my mentors, he had a group dinner for a very diverse group of us. And he basically said, I want you guys to succeed. I see this as mentoring. And he came prepared. Here are my top 10 things that I think that you all need to know in order to succeed in this firm. That is a great way to mentor. And it's a great way that if you're worried about just, having one-on-one with a woman, just make sure it's equal. Make sure that you are including women when you're doing it with men. That said, please, dear God, tell me that's not where we're going with the industry, because it's not helpful at all. And clearly, we all know we need to improve women in the profession numbers as opposed to minimizing, right? Let's not go backwards. Okay, so that's it for today. Mentoring in the Me Too movement. I hope this has been helpful. Please go have these conversations. We really, really need to get in front of this issue. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. I am super excited to announce that the Life and Law Planner is officially here. It is more than just a calendar. It is a full planning system. If you want to take back your days, your weeks, your months, and your year, order your planner now. It will completely change your life and help you accomplish your biggest goals. There's only a limited quantity available, so go to lifeandlawplanner.com and order yours today.